Hi there, and welcome back to another audio production about Otham history with stories and systems. My name is Leonard Bruce. I'm Otham from Lower Santan and Gila River. And today I have a speech from our third governor, Alexander Cannon, that was transcribed in 1939. So this speech comes from the Skoek Oidak Chikpan, meaning good farm work or good field work. And I found this newspaper while working on my newspaper database, which, if you're interested, you can read more about on my Substack. The Chikpan was a paper published by the Indian Agency at the time, and it contains all kinds of cool pieces of history. They published local news, village updates, and even early laws passed by Gila River and our first tribal council back in the 1930s. Now, to give some context, when I say governor, it isn't the same as our governors today. In the early days of our government, with our first constitution back in the 1930s, we didn't have an elected governor. Instead, we elected council members, and they would appoint a governor from within their group. Same with lieutenant governor, secretary, and treasurer. They all came from within the council. So instead of separate positions for an executive office, everything was purely council, just the legislative branch at that point. So, Alexander Cannon took office around 1939, and he was asked to give a speech at the Home Extension Council meeting. This speech covers a couple of themes that I want you to be listening for when I put it on. First, he talks a lot about governance, and he talks specifically how he viewed this new era of self-governance. What he talks about is even with self-governance, we need control over our water and our land ourselves so that people can plan their lives without being discouraged by a lack of land to farm or lack of water to raise the crops to feed their families or to make a living with by selling them. The last thing that he talks about is the revolving fund. Now, this was a program at the time that allowed Otham to take out loans for equipment, seeds, and other farming needs. And I want to take a pause really quick to explain a little bit more about that revolving fund, because I feel like governance, water rights, the land code, and kind of getting away from allotment, I think most folks know about that information, but I think the revolving fund is a piece of that time that's really interesting. So one thing to keep in mind at that time, there was this big shift in the way that people did farming, right? So New Deal era program, the revolving fund, it was really designed to help farmers adapt to the changes that were happening in farming technology. So at the time, agriculture generally was shifting away from like the old style of farming that was related to horses and plows, and it was moving towards tractors, kind of using large scale machines, and it was also being more common to have like these large scale farms, multi acre farms, instead of what the Otham had, which was at that time allotment kind of gave everyone about, I think it's 10 acres. So a lot of people on the personal level had very small farms. Now, this program for the Otham was important for two reasons. First of all, it provided this kind of loan for folks to be able to start up with their buying heavy equipment or buying things that they needed to get their farm started. And in the early 1900s, our lands were heavily divided through allotment, right? And it made it really hard for individual farmers to run like larger operations. The upcoming land code that Cannon talks about was meant to help address this, but without large equipment and larger plots, a lot of the farmers that we had in our community couldn't really compete with neighboring operations like in Casa Grande or Chandler or these other areas. They were able to get a lot more product and sell it for a lot cheaper because they were just able to grow it in bulk, essentially. The other thing that this program did was allowed our folks to have access to credit. So at the time, we didn't really have any assets that could be used as collateral for bank loans because technically nothing belonged to us, right? The allotted land that we received technically belonged to those community members, but you couldn't use it for collateral because the bank could never take it over if you didn't pay your loan back. So these revolving credit funds were really built to help support farmers being able to have more self-sufficiency. Now, when you listen to this speech, keep in mind Cannon was a new governor, right? He's only the third governor under our newly formed government. And he's also speaking to a group made up from the different communities in the Pima agency at the time. So most of the folks who were in this audience were Gila River, but there were also some Salt River and Ak-Chin, but they were all essentially from the same general area. And while his focus is on self-government, self-reliance, and building a successful O'odham community, some of the things that he also talks about in there are from his personal life or just the things that he's seen. So anyway, without further ado, let's get into this speech. And please remember, this is an AI recreation of a real transcript, but this isn't his actual voice. And I'll see y'all on the other side.
I have been asked to deliver to you my own view of the future of the Pimas and the Maricopas on the reservation. I don't know why this subject is given to me, unless maybe I'm a prophet. Although we sometimes enjoy listening to someone trying to foretell the future, perhaps what I say here in my humbleness, I'm speaking justice for the Pima and Maricopa peoples. It was very difficult for me to decide where to start, as so many things come into my mind. And as I go about my work, I try to study the Pimas on the reservation. It is quite a problem, or rather, we are a problem. Those of you who are employed by the government have certain regulations to follow or abide by. A misunderstanding arises between what the Pimas want you to do and what you can't do. So, in making programs for the different projects, there should be a general understanding between the employees and the Pimas. I understand that this is the object of this meeting. I would like to start way back when the Pimas ruled themselves in order to show you my reasons to believe the Pimas have a better future. During these times, there were no farm aids, home extensions, irrigation projects. When water came down the Gila River, it ran almost the year around. In fact, I am told it never dried up. The Pimas prepared for crops. The different heads called for a meeting to discuss farming. When all was planned, they went to work. Their tools and implements for all farm work were not as good as the ones we have now, but they accomplished much and were paid back in crops for their efforts. They raised many kinds of feed. Some of them are not seen now. They stored away their feed and had lots of seeds stored away for the next year's planting. There was nothing else on the reservation from which to make a living. So you see, the Pimas were entirely dependent upon water for feed. As years went by, the water began to diminish as the white people took water above from the Gila River. The crops became less, and so their feed and seeds of many kinds. At one time, I remember one of our main feeds, the tapari bean, could not be found in Casablanca. It was hard times for the Pimas, not because they didn't work or farm. It was the lack of water, and there were no jobs for them. There were no jobs for them like in other white communities. Only one, and that is Uncle Sam. But he says no money. So you see where the Pimas were unable to progress. At that time, there were very few educated Pimas, but they were able to take care of themselves. Their history shows that they were self-supporting. Some people don't understand why the Pimas didn't progress after they were given training to farm. They did not have water, and if they went out to other people, they were not given a chance. Some are lucky to have responsible jobs today, and they prove themselves equal to any other nationality. It's time the Pimas ought to be taught greater farming, but with no water, he cannot progress. While I was in the Phoenix Indian School, I took up farming. I came home prepared to farm. I found no water to irrigate with. It was a sad experience. I sold wood to exist. I went away for 10 years, and when I heard water was turned out to the Pima lands, I came back and have tried in every way to make a living. I found there was something lacking. Let me go back again, when the Pimas were self-supporting. There came a time when the government took hold of almost everything for the Pimas. Here is where the Pimas lost self-reliance. For many more years, the Pimas have tried something different from what they once did. He can never be like he was in times because someone else is the boss over his water. We were given too much milk and were like babies. We were forced to accept offers probably for a good reason. The department knows all about these things I mentioned, but all these years they were indifferent as to the welfare of the Pimas. We are thankful that the men in the Indian Department are new, different, and these workers among the Indians are different. Those men are responsible for the return of something that all Indians of the United States should have, their rights like any other people. What he calls his own should never be taken away from him. We now feel some responsibility. We feel interested in what we would like to do. We feel a little pride in ourselves, knowing we can be like other people. We discuss our community problems freely. All of those the Pimas were without for a while, and this caused him to draw back. In view of the fact the Pima was already a progressive Pima even before education was open to him, and since the return of his rights, I know several young men just eager to do something on their land under the new plan. Therefore, under the self-government, we are now on the road to educate ourselves, as I believe this self-governing is a training to better citizenship. There are good prospects for a successful future of the Pima and his reservation, though you know there are two most important matters to be settled. It is the water and land question. Until these are settled for good, the Pima has a broad future. In the last few years, water was a question. It affected the Pimas considerably. It put fear into his mind as to how he is going to make a living. He was not able to decide what to do, and the result was another discouragement. We hope in another year water will flow and be in the language understood by the Pima, and it will give him a better plan for his farming. The land code, when accepted, will give the Pima an increase over his present 10 acres, an increase in his earnings from his crops. The young man of today will have a better view of what to expect after his schooling. He will be encouraged in his training to be a farmer, knowing he will get an assignment of land. The revolving fund is an important plan to open a way to a successful future for ambitious Pimas. There is no other way for a Pima to borrow money for improvements, but the revolving fund gives him that chance to borrow money as he needs it, thereby giving him a better view of his future. I have mentioned 4 important things which, in my judgment, opens the way to success: self-governing, water settlement, land code, and revolving fund. Though you understand, to use and to apply these things, the Pima must understand their meaning. Right here, I think all government employees, home extension agents, and other workers are responsible for the carrying on to better living conditions. Home extension workers are now alongside of the Pima, pointing to higher aims. I want to finish up by saying that my views of the Pimas and their reservation for their future, with their history of long ago, their struggle, experiences, and the return of their long-lost self-confidence. And with these 4 plans, together with the aid of home extension workers, the Pimas will make their reservation the land of milk and honey. You know, the Pima Indian at one time was a real he-man from head to foot. He wore only a G-string. He lived like that year-round. He fought for protection, not for robbery. He swam in ice-floating waters. He was healthy and strong. His laws, rules that governed his people, were highly respected. Today, we live differently. We are in a new era. Today, the Pima is a streamlined Indian. I mention these because we now have the home extension workers and others in charge of improvements. New things are taught to the people by these workers. The home and extension are two big words, if I understand them, and they can be applied to work successfully if all other things are in actual existence. Though you have accomplished a great deal with what you have, no one knows better than you what is needed. Let me say right here that I would like to have the home extension people keep on with their encouragement, since new helpful things are coming out to help the Pima for a better future. Better homes should be encouraged, better planning for yards and homegrown food in field and garden and orchard. Our children are taught the modern ways, and he or she cannot apply them at home. Perhaps the home extension department has tried some things which do not fit in. I know it is hard for some parents to ever have the means to build a better house, but yet it is the source of life, and they should be shown the importance of it. When this is done, our children will be better cared for, and the child will feel the same as at school. I hope to live long enough to see new homes built for the sake of our children so that they may understand the meaning of getting an education. To have a successful community, it is first shelter, food, health, and work. The home extension workers and the Pima Indians have a great future of achievement, and the way to do successful work is to discuss problems with your different districts to find most needed attention and to enlighten all those things of new plans and help them in their own plans. Guide them about their homes and extend their ideas in better living.
All right, that was pretty interesting, huh? So we learn a lot about Cannon through this speech. First, one of the things that I found interesting was hearing him talk about the river and how he heard that it used to run year-round, but he'd never seen it himself. And one of the things I think a lot about is how, for him growing up with those stories but never experiencing it himself, probably shaped his leadership in a lot of ways, and thinking about how is water so important to our community, but he'd never actually seen the water running because even at that time, the water had been very, very diminished for a long time. The other thing I thought was interesting was we learn a lot about Cannon himself when he talks about how he originally went to Phoenix Indian School to learn farming, which at the time, most Indian schools that our community members went to, they were very focused on practical job skills. They weren't there to prepare students for college like the schools we have today. They were really there to give them some actionable education about how to kind of survive in a community when they worked. The other thing that he talks about is how he came home after school and he found there was not much here, right? He talks about how the only jobs that were really available were with the government, and even they didn't pay very much. So one of the things he discusses is how he sold wood to survive, which a lot of our community members did. That's what happened to the New York thicket, if folks have ever read George Webb's book. But after he was doing that and he was selling wood, he decided to leave home, and he left for over a decade, 10 years. And when he returned, it was because he heard the water was coming back to the community. He heard there would be work, there would be things to do here again. Now, unfortunately, he did come back and he stayed here and he got into our government, but our tribe didn't see a full restoration of our water rights and our water for almost 70 more years. Not until the early 2000s did that lawsuit get settled. But the other thing I think is really interesting outside of this article is just kind of Cannon himself and the work that he did here in the community over his 2 terms. And someday I'll do another episode on this. But one of the major issues that Cannon had to deal with as governor was the Japanese internment camps in our community. So Cannon was actually the first to have to deal with the news that the federal government planned to take some of our tribal land for the large internment camps that they built during World War II. From some of the documentation that I've seen, he was strongly opposed to the idea, but the Indian agent at the time, Robinson, made it very clear that it was going to happen whether we liked it or not. And so Cannon served 2 terms in office. He left the role in 1942, so he stopped being governor at that point. And that was around the time when America officially entered World War II. And then he didn't have to deal with the internment camps, but the next governor, Alfred Jackson, did. But anyway, that's a story for another day. I just wanted to say thanks for listening to this production. I hope you learned a little bit more about Otham history and about one of our early leaders. And if you're interested in learning more, you should check out my newspaper database or my Otham Learning Library. There's tons of resources and documents in there about Otham history. And that's actually one of the ways from taking a look at the Chick Pond that I found this really interesting transcript. If you have any feedback, feel free to leave a comment or email me at lfnbrucie@gmail.com. As always, I'm working with the knowledge that I've found, so if you know something that could improve this story, please reach out. We learn more by working together, and I'm always looking for cool stories to explore. Thank you for listening. Bye.